Welcome back. And now for our senior spotlight, we have Thomas and Patricia Kansas. Welcome to the show. And we know their lifelong history of foreign service, very much a lifelong, and then recently relocated to South Carolina. So welcome to the state. I'm glad for you to be on the show.
Definitely. And tell us, we want to know the story. How do you get involved? How do you find a career in the Foreign Service?
Okay, my wife and I were living in Florida. This was a long time ago. And at that time, I just graduated from the University of Rhode Island, where we both were lived and raised, and we moved to Florida to start a new life. Well, I started working at a small electronics company there in Florida, and after a while, my wife decided that she didn't really care that much for Florida, so we went back to Rhode Island again. And then finally, we went back to Rhode Island for 5 years. I worked at an electronics company there because I have a degree in electrical engineering. And then we went back to Florida. I finally convinced her to move back down again, try it again.
Back and forth.
Back and forth, you know.
Sounds like there's a little dissonance there.
Well, it was her mother was the problem, okay, you know.
Not the problem.
That was the problem,
love.
her mother. It was love, it was love. So finally we went down there again, and this time I started teaching at the vocational school in Florida. I took a job there teaching vocational education electronics in West Palm Beach, Florida. And so I taught school there, and I did it for 1 year thinking I would try it out. Well, 9 years later, I enjoyed teaching so much that I continued the whole 9 years. Well, then I saw an ad in the Miami Herald, and it said, "Join the Foreign Service and see the world." So I picked up the phone, I called them, and they said, "Well, we'll come for an interview."
I just want to know how well that went when you went home to talk to Patricia about that, because
I was thrilled.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I was pleased. I was ready to move on. That wasn't a problem.
So it's a good way to as your ticket out of Florida, probably.
Well,
right,
actually, that was a good idea. But it was interesting. We had a son who was just 5 years old at the time, so he was ready to move on in school. So it was a good timing in our life. It was very good.
That's great.
No complaints.
So you take the test.
So I take the test, the Foreign Service test, and I pass the test.
Was it hard?
It's a fairly difficult test.
Extensive, I'm sure.
It's extensive, very extensive, and I completed the test, and then I went for an interview. Now, in the Foreign Service, you have the test which you have to pass, and then you have the oral examination. The oral examination is equally as hard as the written examination, and there they put you in front of a board, and the board grills you about all various topics and things. And then if you pass that, then you are finally accepted into the Foreign Service. So I did pass it, and our first assignment was Athens, Greece. So we went to Athens, Greece for 4 years. That was our very first assignment.
With a young child in tow.
And we had our son, Scott.
Very interesting, because neither of us spoke Greek. And it was a little difficult time with American politically, with Greece and America. They were not exactly working well together. But I learned Greek to speak it.
Sure.
And then our child learned Greek. Well, my husband was traveling all the time with the presidents of the president, vice president, secretary of state. So he wasn't there very much in Athens. But I learned to survive and to drive, which most women did not drive at that time at all. But in order to survive, you had to drive. So I learned to acclimate myself to the Greek way of life.
So after Greece, where did you end up?
Well, after Greece, you know, in the Foreign Service, every 3 years they assign you to another post. That's the way it works. You're only allowed to stay 3 years, and then you can have a 1-year extension. But then after that, you must go to another area. And the way you do that is you fill out a paper and you say, I wish to go to you have 3 continents you can take a pick from.
Oh, wow.
But then they will assign you to one of those continents where you go. So after that, we went to, I believe, was Niamey, Niger, which is a French francophone country in the middle of the Sahara Desert, if you've never heard of it. It's right in the middle of the desert.
Right.
And it was quite a culture shock to go into a place where it's sand and desert, and the beach is 1,000 miles of sand, you know, and then to get to the water.
Right. So just
Camels?
a little bit landlocked.
And you walk in front of your house, and there's 100 camels out there, and they call the camels.
They're kind of noisy, aren't they?
Camels are kind of. They're actually mean buggers, and they have a funny way of spitting and things. And they're nasty animals, but they have the reputation as windmills of the desert because they walk with big feet and they walk so softly. and you cannot hear them walking.
Oh.
And so at night you had to be careful because sometimes
For
a camel
any
would walk
camel
up behind you and you
collisions.
wouldn't see them.
Plus a little endurance to them also. I
Right.
believe. They-
Well,
Right.
camels were the working animals at that time. And I can remember now looking at, there was a bridge crossing the Niger River, and at night, 5 o'clock at night, all the camels, hundreds of camels, would come over the bridge loaded with twigs.
Oh my.
Twigs.
Firewood.
They would use that to cook. That was their cooking.
God.
That's great.
So that's what they used to cook, little twigs.
Well,
I know we have a lot more questions for you because we're going to move right through,
Okay.
I think, travel the world a little more, but we're going
Yeah.
to take a quick break and we'll be right back after this message.
welcome back. We're talking with Thomas and Patricia, Kansas, and they've been sharing with us their explorations of the world, and I think we've covered Greece, the Sahara Desert, and where else did the two of you live?
Well, we've lived in several countries. Primarily, we've lived in South America, Africa, and Europe. One of our best assignments was in Germany. We really enjoyed Germany. Germans have an incredible culture. They have incredible food. I think we gained 20 pounds in Germany. We were there 7 years, so it was quite a while. But the Germans know how to live life, and they're very conscious of the environment, and they're healthy people in general, even though their food has a high fat content, I must admit.
Lots of starch,
Yeah.
including
Lots of
lots of
starch.
beer, right?
Not
Is
to
it-
mention the beer.
Not to mention the
not to
beer.
mention- Well, I have a trick question for you, Patricia. I want to know how many languages you speak, at least in a little bit.
Okay, we'll say basically English and Spanish, of course, but then we had to study and did study 4 other languages. And we went to school, before we go to any country, we have to go to school in Washington for 6 months, and we go to classes for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Oh, wow.
And then you take an examination.
And then it's language study, which is
All
a big
language
part.
study,
Okay.
whatever country we're Spanish,
culture
French,
and language
German,
to
or
learn
both. Exactly.
to learn about the
And
people
then
you're.
you pass an exam again, and then you get your, well, you already have your assignment, but in order to go to your assignment, you have to pass the language test.
Wow.
And so it's complicated. It's not easy. A lot
And
of
we have to
stress.
share with the audience, Thomas was in the Foreign Service
First, that's right, right.
forever how long?
Well, I was
Oh.
in it for
18 years.
years.
And then you joined.
Then we both retired in Hawaii. We went to Hawaii and retired. And then
you thought
We
you
thought.
retired.
my
Right.
wife said she didn't want to live on an island.
Right.
So she decided to.
I came home one day and I had talked to some friends that had been in the Foreign Service. They were retired. And they said, well, you're too young. We were only in our 40s. And so he said, why don't you take the exam, this gentleman friend? And so I said, oh, what'll Tom say to this one? So I went and took the exam and I told Tom, well, I passed. How would you like to go overseas with me this time? So we agreed. And our first assignment was in Conakry, Guinea, which is in West Africa. And it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And again, it was another fantastic experience. It really, really was. And Tom, I came as a direct hire at that point. But when we got to post, our ambassador wanted to speak to Tom. He didn't want to speak to me. And I was supposed to work directly for him. And I said,
Interesting.
yes, sir. And he said, I'd like to speak to Mr. Kansas. So he called Tom in, and he said, how long have you two been married? And I said, why did he ask that? And we were married 25 years at that point. And so he said 25 years. He said, oh, okay. He said, you can pick any job you want in the embassy except his, the ambassadorship, because Tom could go anyway. And so he said, all right. He selected a job. And then after I said, Tom, why did he say, how long have we been married? Because when I took the Foreign Service exam, they asked me if my husband had been a Foreign Service officer. And I said, yes, ex. And they didn't ask if it was my ex-husband or ex-officer. So the ambassador was checking it out.
There we
I was
go.
really the same person.
Just making sure it was the valid.
Exactly.
Right,
that-
right.
So here you have kind of the service to working for the United States in all these different countries,
Correct.
and now it's translated into, what a good word, translated
Right,
into
exactly.
service in a local community, a community
Right.
that you've just moved to. And tell us, Thomas, kind of what have you gotten involved in the Spartanburg area?
Well, first of all, people always ask us how we ended up in Spartanburg, right?
I did
can't
wonder
pronounce
that
it
myself.
properly, I know, but I do my best, you know. Somebody told me it's Wofford. It's not Wofford, okay?
Right.
So somebody straighten me out on that. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn the language. Okay, we're still learning. We've learned all the
We're
other
learning the
languages.
Spartanburg
Now we're trying to learn
Exactly.
The
Spartanburg.
upstate.
Southern dialect takes longer than 6 months. I hate to break that to you.
And I haven't got my yellow grits and my white grits now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
I'm
yellow,
working
white.
on it, okay? But anyways, we came here because we did a lot of research on the internet about retiring in different places. And we came here because there's several universities here. And there's several activities
Right.
related to the university. So we go to all the concerts, we go
Very
to
good.
various...
So for the culture, if you will, and one of the things you're doing is volunteering at the cultural,
Right.
the Chapman Cultural Center.
Correct.
we volunteer at the Chapman
And
Cultural
then Mary
Center.
Black.
And Mary Black, and then we're also going to be volunteering at the regional Spartanburg Regional Hospital
And
too.
I guess a life of volunteerism and service is what gives you purpose and meaning in your lives.
Well, it's wonderful, and the people are so great, whether they're patients or they're part of the staff, they're so welcoming that you feel like you're part of the community. And being strangers and newcomers, it's nice to be part of a community.
And we have a lot to learn from the two of
That's
you.
great. Well,
Because they've been a part of a lot of communities.
That's right. Well, Thomas and Patricia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank
We'd
you.
love to have you back, and we'll probably continue the conversation maybe off the set.
Okay.